Welcome. This is such a delightful day. We've been looking forward to this with our special friend, Helen, and all of you who are here. We've just about filled up all of our seats, so that means we're having a good turnout. And we're going to hear from Helen in just a little bit, so I'd like to start off by welcoming everyone, and also those of you who are watching on our live stream. You're a part of this gathering too. So if you're here on live stream, we welcome you, and if you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a place for questions and Q&A, and so throughout our time together, if you have a question or thought or suggestion, you can put it in there, and we will definitely be reading them. So we want to thank everybody for coming today. We always thank our very special friend, St. Paul's Church. As you can see, this is such a beautiful place, and they're such a beautiful people. And Father Eric is a great friend of the center, and sometimes we do programs together, and then sometimes we'll do them on our own. But either way, they're our host. And Father Eric and the people of St. Paul's, we always like to thank them. And also all the members of the center. Almost every one of you, if you've been around a while, support the center and join and help us keep this good work going. So we're here for you. That's our job. Our job is to be a partner with you in your journey. So before we get started, and before I introduce Helen a little more, I'll just do the housekeeping for those who are new. If you need the facilities, you go back out that north front door to the other side hallway, and you'll see the restrooms there. You'll see snacks. We always have snacks. That's high on our list. And coffee and different beverages. If you're at home, you probably know where the snacks are. So those are our housekeeping details. And we want to start by thanking Helen for coming and taking time out of her busy schedule to be with us. And she is a very special, we call her Lady. Many of you know, who've known her for years, that's the name often she goes by. She's certainly a lady to us, but formally she told me to use Helen, so we'll use Helen. But as you know, she's a hospice chaplain for many years. She's an interfaith minister, a spiritual counselor, and not the least recently, an author of a new book called Just Tell Them That I Love Them, and I am very eager to hear more about that. She shared a little of the book while she was writing and editing and so forth, and the stories each story is just wonderful. And so I'm very, very eager to hear about that. We also always welcome Patricia Pierce. Patricia, as you know, if you've been around our center long, is our interviewer extraordinaire. She's a former pastor and a spiritual teacher, and also she has a podcast that's wonderful called the We Awakening podcast. So check that out online. You'll really enjoy it. Her name is spelled P-E-A-R-C-E, Patricia Pierce. So she'll be doing some interviewing with Helen. And remember, at the end, after we interview for a while, we will have a Q&A. So prepare your questions. If you think about them, remember them. If you can't remember them, jot them down like I have to. But remember, we will have a Q&A at the end, and we'll be passing the mic around, and you'll have a chance to dialogue one-on-one with Helen and or Patricia. We like to do that, and those of you at home, the same way. If you have a question throughout our time, just type it into the chat box, and we will pass this along to Patricia as she is coordinating our Q&A, and we will be good to go. I'm excited about this. So let's welcome Helen and Patricia to the center. Come on up, folks. They'll sit up here.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
It's great to be here with you all. It's so nice to have an in-person event. We don't do that very much anymore since COVID. We do a lot of hybrid, but it's wonderful to have our online participants as well.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Can you turn up microphone number?
Hello, everyone. I think my mic's a little
2.
louder. Maybe
Number 2.
mine needs to go down a little.
Okay, is that good? Is that better? Great. Thanks. Thank you. So, Helen, you have authored this beautiful book, Just Tell Them I Love Them, which includes vignettes from your many years of being a hospice chaplain. And before we get into that, I would love to hear what took you into that vocation. How did you end up being a hospice chaplain?
Oh, well, has been a beautiful journey. I have always been very interested in death and dying, end of life. Back in the 80s, when I was in my college years, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work really took me, her work on grief. And I was also, since 7th grade, always interested in how people relate to the divine. And that always took me in. So those two things accompanied me through my young life of motherhood and my young working life. And my own experiences of life and loss led me to an opportunity to do hospice work, but not before I had a very critical aha. They call those the thoughts that we don't think.
Yes.
And I actually have a story about this incident in my book. And it's called About Face, because I was looking in the mirror and a voice came through me from my eyes to my eyes and said, "What are you doing?" I was in a very successful publishing career. I was being offered a new job where I would travel to Europe. I was excited, and I was completely dumbfounded by that voice, and it completely turned me around. So it wasn't until several years later that I actually found out what I was supposed to do, because I was being told, this is not who you are. And something about meaning, like, can you give me a little more here? Can you give me a little more? So anyway, after a couple years of finishing my degree and getting some credentials in interfaith ministry and also in chaplaincy, I found myself as a hospice chaplain. Yeah, in my 50s. In my early 51, I was.
That's really inspiring, I
Yeah.
think, to be able to make that kind of really extreme life transition at that point, like really changing your direction in such a radical way. So that to me speaks of the depth of your faith and your trust, that you are being accompanied and led, and to follow that even though you don't know where it's going to be taking you, but that's what it's all about. So you have accompanied people who are at that threshold.
Yes.
That threshold between being embodied in this form, in this life, in this world, and making that transition. And it's a very sacred, that's a very sacred moment. And what is it like, what has it been like for you to accompany people who are approaching that moment? What's it been like for you personally to do that?
The first word that comes to my heart is privilege. It's a complete, astounding privilege to find yourself at the bedside of someone who is so close to the other side and completing this beautiful life journey, usually surrounded by their loved ones. And I'm looking out and I'm seeing a few of my nurse and hospice friends in the audience, and as they know, the privilege to do that as a team, knowing you're not alone, with some medical, hospice professionals, but also the other team, the team on the other side, the team that is waiting and eager and available to welcome people home. And I have absolutely zero doubt about that. And I can feel it. So it's a privilege. It's an absolute privilege.
And what is it like, because you're not only ministering to the person who's dying, but you're ministering also to their loved ones,
Right.
who are in a very different situation. And what is that like to be with them, and what have you learned in your experience, both about accompanying those who are making that transition and also being with those who are going to be left behind and are dealing with that?
Oh, it's such a beautiful question. I had the most beautiful training at Jefferson. The Reverend Joseph Legere and Reverend Marianne Robbins were exquisite teachers. And what I learned from them was that who I was being was way more important than what I was doing. That my presence, the quality of my presence, was absolutely critical. So leaving my ego at the door, what I call the Lady Burke show, my nickname. You know, the Lady Burke, nobody in there needs the Lady Burke show. You know, I have no idea what anybody needs. So actually, if I may continue on that questioning, when I started my hospice work, I had this little ritual that before every door I entered, I would say a silent prayer. Please tell me what to do. Please tell me what to say. And thank you. And I was in the work weeks, possibly months, but it was very early on. And I found myself outside of, I remember the room, I remember the doorway, because I used to use the doorway as my signal to say that prayer, whether it was to somebody's house or a hospital room. I'm in the doorway, tell me what to do, tell me what to say. And I received a message, a thought that I did not think. Just tell them I love them, which is what the title of the book is and why it is the title of the book. Just tell them I love them. Tell them in whatever way you think they will understand, and you don't have to keep asking. It will always be the same answer. I can never say that without feeling how I felt at that moment, because that has really not only informed my work, but it has informed my life. The thought that we're not really here to teach one another, we're here to love one another, we're here to show that we are loved and to receive that love. So that's a long answer. But in reference to answering your original question about the family members, what I also learned from my teachers in what we call, as you I'm sure know, clinical pastoral education, is the focus on social norms, religious norms, cultural norms. So we had a lot of education about how people respond to grief and what's normal in different cultures, and in different faith traditions, what practices. And at Jefferson at that time, I had a lot of exposure to all different kinds of folks. So that idea of your presence and your loving attention to what is needed, what is being asked, and what is not being asked is critical. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I see you relating behind those
Well,
eyes.
when you said what is not being asked, because I think that speaks to, we might come into the encounters with our own agendas or assumptions
100%.
about what is going to be helpful. And I'm really struck by, first of all, that message you received, just tell them that I love them. And tell them in whatever way you think they can understand. And that, you know, when I read that, it's like, wow, that feels like an art form to me. Because you don't know these people yet, and you don't know what is going to feel loving to them. You know, what feels loving to one person might feel intrusive to another person. So how do you dance that dance and sense, you know, how can I be the expression of love in this moment?
I love this question, because the only way to know is really to be present and to be open to the voice of truth, spirit, that, by the way, I don't hear all the time in my ears. There are very few times that I actually had that whole body experience of a voice. But we all have these intuitions, these knowings. But unless we're really present to the moment, what's going on, we can't hear it. If we have chatter about, oh, I just learned that, you know, Catholics say the Hail Mary, so I'm going to go in there and say a Hail Mary, you know, or I actually had that happen to a relative of mine, and I was ready to punch out that chaplain. Actually, it was the opposite. I told the person that my aunt, my cousin Bridget, who's in the book, my beloved Bridget, that her favorite prayer was the Rosary, and the chaplain said, "No, that's fine. I have my own prayer." That was what caused the, which I didn't. I behaved. But I mean, it's that kind of thing that you're talking about. Assuming that we know what's needed, I think, is the biggest trap. So yeah, it's being present enough to observe and listen. And again, the directive. How do I convey? It wasn't, you know, I don't think I was meant to go into every room and say, "Oh, by the way, God loves you, you're good." You know? I don't think that was going to cut it. I think it was more assessing the situation and, you know, in whatever way they can understand. You know, and it wasn't, I love them. It's the big I. It's the big one. It's the big love. It's the ultimate love that is saying, tell them they are loved, you know, in whatever way. So I think what's interesting is in the book that the nuance of that directive really came into play. Because I wasn't told, tell them to forgive each other. I wasn't told them to get to church. I wasn't told you know, not me. I mean, maybe somebody else is doing that. You know, I'm not saying any of those things are wrong. I'm just saying that wasn't my directive. And so I had to figure out what possible way could I convey that in some very difficult situations. But I was guided because I was listening, you know.
Right. So to me, that speaks, well, obviously to presence, being open to the moment, being open to the person, the mystery of the person as they are, and a certain humility on your part, you know, to be teachable in this moment with this person, and to also, you know, something I'm sort of sensing, to live with your own, perhaps in the beginning, discomfort about not knowing what to do. So you talk about being present, and we can all feel the quality of Helen's presence, can't we? I mean, you are there. You're with us, and you're completely present. And that, it seems to me, is something that, I mean, I think some people are just born with that, but I sense also you have cultivated that ability to be so present. And as you were cultivating that ability, what was going on internally for you in terms of like being in the moment and like managing your own uncertainties and your own discomforts? And because being present is being present to oneself as much as the other person,
I love
right?
that.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, about both of those dimensions of being present.
100%, because the first thing that comes to my mind is being aware of my judgments. I got judgments about everything. I got opinions about everything. Who should be in this room? Why isn't the sister here? Why isn't the husband here? You know, I mean, we all have, or whatever it might be, or, oh, couldn't that nurse have said that a little bit nicer, or, you know, whatever it might be. So yes, there's a whole lot going on. And I think the main, most important thing is being aware of my own biases, my own judgments, my own reactions, and allowing them, noticing them, allowing them, not acting from them. You know, it's kind of like, that's part of the Lady Burke show. We don't need you right now, you know, kind of thing. Like, yes, you know, yes, the room is really difficult. It, you know, might be some hard things to see or whatever. Or yes, there's an argument happening, and you know, you are the piece. You come in, you know, whatever it might be. But yeah, so it's being aware of all of the things that are keeping you from being present, I think, is the answer to your question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that instructive, you know, just tell them that I love them. I think a lot of us are not able to accept that. What do you, in your experience, what have you found keeps people from accepting that they are loved like that?
Well, I think many of us were raised and understand that there's an aspect of us that might be considered unworthy of that love. The parts of us that get it wrong, the parts of us that give over to fear, the parts of us that react quickly out of emotion without doing our own personal work of processing whatever's going on. So, and then basically, we're all flawed. We all sin. We miss the mark. I forget the question.
So did I.
Good.
we're both so present this like, that was way back then.
That was way back then.
Oh, what blocks us from accepting divine love? What blocks us
beautiful.
from really knowing that, accepting that, and receiving that?
Yeah. Well, I do think that in my own case, I do think that in addition to the exquisite tradition that Catholicism that I was raised in, and which gave me many, many, many gifts in the core of my faith, I think during the time that we lived, there was a very strong emphasis on recognizing our wrongs, you know, really understanding our sins and, you know, our missteps, our missing the marks. And I think, I imagine that a lot of the people here and a lot of people listening can relate to some of that. So this idea of worthiness, I think the message, to try to convey the message, again, in whatever way might be understood, that we're worthy not because of who we are and what we've done and what we've accomplished and any of that. We're worthy because we are of that. We are of that one. We are of God. We are a thought of God. We are a spark of divine love, here to share that spark and grow it. And no exceptions. No exceptions. And when we can connect with that knowing, remember ourselves not only with the divine, but with all. God is one. Hear, O Israel, God is one. We're all connected. And when we can reconnect with that, there is this sense of, how can we not be loved? How can we not be part of love itself when we are willing to acknowledge that's who I am? That's who I am. Yeah.
And having done this accompaniment with so many people over so many years, what effect has that had on how you live your own life?
Well, it's really interesting because the stories that are in this book, a good third of them precede my work in hospice. So it's been a lifelong journey. And it's almost like I think my life experiences affected my work life experience. And then all of that together is affecting my life now. Because one of the things that I say about these stories and the story that I had to tell was this idea of threshold moments. And thresholds I think of in terms of those moments or seasons that invite us to grow. They can be a moment, how are you going to react? They can be years of making difficult decisions. They can be periods of grief. They can be, I'm looking around the audience and I'm thinking of different people as we talk, and my artist friends, I'm thinking they can be inspiration. They can be creativity, they can be, but anyway, thresholds I think of as moments or seasons that hold us, that invite transformation, right? And boy, we don't want those invitations sometimes. No, thank you. No, thank you. Don't feel like having heartache today. Don't feel like being fill in the blank. Don't feel like losing, fill in the blank. And yet, how many of us, seriously, in this audience, I'm just show of hands, how many of you can honestly say you have never had a heartbreak that grew you? Has anybody ever had a heartbreak? And I'm not saying one heartbreak that didn't grow you. I'm saying, how many have not had a heartbreak that grew you? Ultimately grew you as a soul. And maybe some have. But just the question, I didn't mean to put anybody on the spot either, but I don't really see any hands. But the point is that we're here on Earth School to grow these little sparks, to flame the fire. Who is this soul? What about this soul is unique? What gifts do I have to share? So, again, I forget what I was talking about.
You don't have to, you just go with that flow.
Yeah.
Just go with that flow.
So, the one thing I did want to go back to, though, was, a couple things, but there was one incident where the just tell them I love them was, my very oldest, bestest, dearest friend is here. And this story she doesn't like. And I know why. She doesn't like this story because, well, that's another story. But anyway, the story is, it's called Crazy Colored Socks. And it's about a girl in her 30s who was dying of cancer at a residential hospice. And when I went in to greet her, I said my, little prayer, and then I remembered, just tell them I love them. I go in the room. She's got these crazy colored socks, mix match socks, knitted in all different colors, and a big cap on, these big bushel red hair, under a big duvet cover, big white duvet cover. And I said, hi, I'm Helen, I'm the chaplain. I'm just checking in to say hello, introduce myself. And she sat up in her a little bit, and she said, let's get one thing straight. I hate my sister. I'm going to die hating my sister. And if that's not okay with you, I don't need a chaplain. So talk about how do you... So I'm going to fast forward and not belabor it. But I basically several times was told we're not going there. And if you want to go there, you need to leave because we're not going there. So I have two choices. And if I'm thinking, if I'm thinking she needs to forgive her sister, I got nothing, right? Of course I can pray for her. Of course I did pray for her. But if I just stood there, I didn't get a directive, just tell her to forgive her sister. Just tell her I love her in whatever way you think she'll understand. So that was listening, coming back, listening some more, talking to her mother, helping her mother realize that God's got it covered. Same God loving her daughter. God's got it covered. That was one of my favorite things. And helping her examine what she needed as a mother. Of course, her heart was breaking. She had dealing with all of that, right? This young lady died according to her wishes. It broke her mother's heart. It broke my heart. It broke my bestie's friend heart, my bestie friend's heart, which is why she hates the story. But I think it's such a powerful reminder of not only following the directive of sharing God's love, but for me to trust in that love. It was such an invitation for me to trust that. To trust that God's got it covered. She's doing her own thing with God, So, I know that's pretty controversial. I'm just throwing it out there, but as a big extreme example of how difficult it can be to have that, be your guiding, which I was given this directive.
Right.
I was gifted it. And I'm very grateful. And I have to trust it.
So for her, your willingness to accompany her and honor her wishes was the loving thing to do with her.
Yeah.
And to not walk away from her, not to insist that she be different than she was.
Exactly. And to understand that perhaps in her eyes, I represented her relationship with God.
Right.
Because I say, I'm a chaplain. She says, well, I don't need you.
Yeah.
Right? So hopefully I'm saying, well, I'm not going anywhere because I love you. Not me, right? So.
Yeah. And your final day as a hospice chaplain, you had an experience of your own daughter who had crossed over at a very early age. Can you talk to us about her and your experience of going through that as a mother and how that experience, how you brought that into your relationships as a chaplain?
So my daughter Katie was born in 1980 and died in 1981. She lived for 7 months and she died of complications with her heart. And her life, her death, and my life with her since, her life and her death rocked many lives, many of whom are in this room right now. My sisters, my daughter, my girlfriends, my neighbors, my women's group. How did that inform? I think it's part of the reason that I pursued hospice care, a big reason, because I was not only interested in death and dying in my college years, but I experienced it, and the death of my father the same year, within months. So loving and losing and grieving, and then some more grieving, and then discovering a new relationship with Katie has been extraordinary. And I just have to point out that there's a beautiful story in this book where my relationship with my daughter Katie directly affected another family with a daughter named Katie. And Katie's mom is in the audience, and she is willing to show us who she is. Can you stand up for a second? This is my friend Joanne, who's the other Katie's mom. And I hope we get to hear from her a little later, and if not today, stay tuned, because we're going to do some things together. The other Katie's mom. So on the last day of my work, I just, it was a beautiful spring day. I was visiting a couple in their late 50s, early 60s. The patient who was dying was very ready to go home, very ready, and very good with her faith. Her husband was struggling. I was there supporting him. And he was saying, he met me out in the driveway. He said, all these people, and they're bringing food and this and that. And so I said, okay, let me help you, if I may, clear the house and give you some time. He just wanted time with his wife alone. So I made a few little interventions there, asking in front of his company, would he like some alone time with his wife? And to which they all kind of got the message. Anyway, at one point, he went into the kitchen to put food away, and I came to visit the patient. I came around her bed, and I was between her bed and the wall. And she was minimally responsive, which means she was conscious, but, kind of just doing this kind of thing with her eyebrows and letting us know she could hear, but not enough energy to respond. She was perfectly comfortable. And as I went up the side of the bed, I felt a hand behind my back. And my immediate thought was, how did he get back in here that soon? And I thought, oh, no, it's not him, the father, or the husband. My next thought was daughter. And I thought of my daughter Meg, who's here today. And then I thought, daughter, it's Katie. I knew it. It felt as if, when you're standing at the kitchen sink and somebody, your sisters, we used to sing at the kitchen sink all the time, my sisters and I doing dishes. But you know how you would be standing at the kitchen sink and somebody wants to go by you to get to the cabinet or whatever. That's what it felt like. I could feel the hand on my back and then movement behind me. And as soon as I said, daughter, Meg, no, it's Katie. It was my very last day of hospice. And I knew that she had come to show me that she had been with me the whole time. And that I always felt that she was with me. So it was a miracle. It was a miracle, and it's something that I hold very much in my heart. Yeah. She's here today. Hi, Katie.
Yeah, hi, Katie.
Hi, Joanne's Katie. And hi, all the loved ones who we're missing right now. I'm looking around the room. And I'm aware that we're not alone here today.
And you came to know that Katie's job on the other side was to welcome the children and help them orient when they'd crossed over.
That was wild. That was wild.
It's like the two of you were on that threshold, but on opposite sides.
Yeah. I have another whole story about that I won't tell you, but I was actually told that was Katie's job. And it was, that story leads into the story with Katie. Because my Katie helped to escort Joanne's Katie home. And we have no doubt about that. Yeah.
And that, to me, I mean, I think this is a beautiful place to end our conversation, because it just points to the mystery of it all.
Yes.
And the love, and that there's so much more going on than, we experience here in the physical dimension. That that we are accompanied in so many ways. Well, Helen, I want to thank you for all of the work that you've done and all the souls that you've touched, and for this book, which is a really beautiful account of some touching vignettes from your time as a hospice chaplain. And I would love to, open it up now for questions that people might have here. First, we'll do in person, and then we'll hear if there are questions from our online participants. And you can raise your hand if you have a question, and Ken has the microphone, and he'll hand that to you so the people online can hear you as well.
Thank you. Lady, so I know you excel at this, but when we're trying as civilians to comfort someone who's just lost a very special person, people are reluctant to visit or go, and they don't know what to say, they don't know. But how important is it just to be there silently?
It cannot be measured. It cannot be measured. It's also highly preferred in many, many cases. Sometimes the person that you're supporting might be a little confused by that, in which case you just say, I just want to be here with you. And then the pressure's off. They know they don't have to say anything. I think showing up is the best thing we can ever do. At the same time, I think asking people, would it be okay? Sometimes people need their privacy and their alone time and so forth. So it's kind of measuring that. But yes, I think it's immeasurable, the value of that.
And Sophia, you had a question.
From my experience with hospice, hospice workers are angels on earth. Okay. When I took care of my mother for 10 months until the moment she died, and hospice would come in every week, and as she was approaching her transition, she started seeing things. One time she had her eyes closed, and I said, Mama, what are you thinking? She didn't respond, and I said, if you tell me, you're going to feel much better. And she opened her eyes and said, I'm waiting for God to invite me to his house. And she saw children that she said looked like angels. And I would tell this to hospice, and they go, oh, we hear this all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing is the directive, that you were getting directions. I missed the first part because of blockages here, but it really brought to mind, as I was being wheeled in for surgery for a corneal transplant surgery, and I was really terrified, and I was praying, and I was talking to Jesus, and the nurse that was wheeling me said, she leans over to me and she goes, Jesus has you covered. Now I could be anything. I could be an atheist or anything, you know? And so that is probably what that's what happened to her, I think, that she had a directive. But the other thing is I'm very curious. Okay, the young woman who did not want to forgive her sister, what did you say to her?
I mostly listened to her. I didn't really have permission to go anywhere with her. We would talk about her pain. We would talk about her life a little bit. She was also very weak. She had very limited stamina. So, and I told her that I was visiting with her mother, and that, her supporting her mother. But very little. I figured it wasn't about what I said for her. And yes, our own mother, my two sisters are here with me today, and our own mother the day before she died, and I could have the timing wrong, but within hours or days of my mother's death, she looked up in the corner and she said, "Oh, there's Daddy, clear as day." And then she said, asked my sister Denny to please polish her nails because the Blue Eyes was coming. Well, Blue Eyes was a Monsignor that she was friendly with. She used to work at the Archdiocese. Can you put on some nail polish because my Blue Eyes is coming to visit? So, I mean, she was here, but she was going. You know what I mean? It's amazing. And we see that a lot. We see a lot of instances of the veil thinning.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm an interfaith minister as well, Reverend Joyce. I went to the new school, I think it was, yeah. Anyway, I'm wondering if you know of schools that have death education. Sometimes I see on Facebook they'll have, what subjects do you think should be taught in school? And I always put down death education. I mean, I took stenography. I didn't use it one day in my life. And I'm just wondering, because we all go through it, and a lot of times that's when addictions start, because people don't know how to handle it. Whether in fact, I used to do a puppet show for the first grade. It was called Babes, and one of the lessons was on coping. And my boss would get so upset. You really shouldn't be talking about that. I says, well, I am going to talk about it, so figure that out. And the kids would love to talk about it. And I started out with fish, a pet, a dog, a cat. The next week, can we continue to talk about it? They were just so hungry to talk about it. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you know of any schools or curriculums on death education.
Well, honestly, I'm out of the loop a little bit, but I do think that they're all over the place. What I can tell you is if that you're interested in doing specifically chaplaincy, that would require what they call clinical pastoral education, or CPE, which Jefferson has, and some of the major hospitals have those programs. But specifically, and there are also many programs for what they call death doulas, which are very, very significant. So I would check those out. In terms of, but you're talking about death education and children, and I think that's really a beautiful niche that, because it's also, we're talking about loss and grief as well. We're talking about death, loss, and grief. And I do know some amazing music and art therapists who deal with children who have had loss in their families and so forth. But I would just say, keep checking, and if you wanted to send me an email, and if I come up with something, I'll let you know.
So you don't know of any schools that right now are...
No, I don't. And I know they're out there. Or maybe not schools, but programs or or study courses of study. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
So I have this uncle, who is also my godfather, our uncle. He favored me because he was my godfather, and the family was not the jealous type, so nobody cared that he favored me. And when he was dying, I did a lot of the arranging to get him into this facility, and he was very demanding that I come every day, and I was a single mother at the time, but I did it, and it was, I did my best. And I thought to myself, you really do need to take this seriously, because you're his favorite person, said me. He didn't say that. Nobody said that. I said that, right? And then when the time came, when he was in his last 2 days, a musical gentleman came around, and he did hospice type musical, and he had a guitar. He had 3 instruments, and I thought, I wish you had come sooner, because he would have gotten more out of it, because he's now close to death, right? But he was awake enough to ask me to leave. He said he wanted that guy, that stranger, with him. And I had all my ego involved in that. I was outside the room feeling like, but I've been here. And I had to really check myself. So sometimes it's not being in the room, it's being willing to be in the room.
I love that.
And,
I love that.
So I did get to see him, but that was the last time that he was conscious enough. So I was in the room later, but he didn't know it, or he may have known it. But that's what I learned because I had been a nurse a long time, and I did know the value of just being in the room, just holding a hand. But from that lesson was, you're not, maybe they don't want you in the room. Maybe you can just be gracious about stepping out of the room. That's what I learned from that.
Thank you. Well, there's another, I'll just throw this in while you're going over to the next person. But it is very well known to people who work end of life all the time that there is no recipe for what the person is going to prefer. Sometimes people really don't want the people they most love in the room, because they want to spare them the pain of that. So that could have very well been it. And sometimes they do, and we don't always know. So we usually recommend, in those situations where you want to be there but you don't know if the person wants to be there, or it seems like it's taking forever, to offer up. If you're able to ask the person, great. If you're not, then maybe alternate time with the person and time where they have to be alone. They'll go when they're ready, and heaven's ready, right?
I wanted to say that you might remember Barry and Joyce Vissell, who were doing a lot of relationship counseling.
Yes.
And she wrote a book with her daughter for children about death. And it's been out quite a while, but I think it's how to tell your children about heaven, or something like that. And I thought, if you can get it, that might be something that would be helpful to read as a little primer. Very sensitively done.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. That's great.
So fun, I get to hear all my aunties speaking and my mama speaking, and my sister's here. So just a funny little thing in our family, which is that my mom is, do you already know what I'm gonna say?
I think so, but go ahead.
Is we would say, you're obsessed with death, because she's always thinking about death. And she honestly, earnestly would be like, no, I think I'm just a little preoccupied with death. But I know you've done so much thinking about death and being fully present while we're here and the transitions. And I'm just curious, because I know some people kind of celebrate their life while they're still here, like have a funeral while they're still here. I'm not sure what that's called, like an end of life celebration or something like that. And I'm just curious if you, like, that's kind of still a new practice, I think. It's not very common. But what you might have to say about that, like, would you recommend people think about planning for that as they approach that? I know hospice is a little different because people are very sick, but
Yeah.
like, just any thoughts that you have on that practice or ritual?
I think that's such a great question, and I'm so glad you brought it up. Because what I have experienced is people who have end-of-life celebrations that are very joyful, meaning that people who have died have end-of-life celebrations now that are very joyful, as opposed to the traditional services and what my mother used to call back at the house, the back at the. But anyway, one of my husband's relatives had a beautiful, beautiful celebration like that after he died at a country club and party, and another neighbor had a party and dancing, the family had. But I have not yet attended someone's end-of-life celebration. But I think it's a fabulous idea, and I'm all about it. I'm all about it because, and I'm going to tie this in with something important about hospice. People wait too long to bring in hospice. People do not realize that when they have a terminal illness or process that is probably going to conclude within a 6-month period, they get all of these services through Medicare for free, including social workers, chaplains, music therapists, art therapists. And the problem is that we just don't want to admit that we're at that point. And so then we're in and out of the hospital, we're rehab, we're this or that. So anyway, that's a big passion of mine. But it goes along with what you're asking, because when we can get real about death, when we can acknowledge, hey, I may not have a long time to live, you know, we make those bucket lists and go for it and celebrate. So I think that's a beautiful extension of that idea is, and what's the worst that can happen? You have a big blowout and you're still around next year and you say, oh, well, we got to do it all over again.
I love that.
I'd like to mention my Christmas a year ago, my sister would usually have a family gathering during the Christmas holidays. Well, Christmas a year ago, she had it, but she said, I'm having it catered, and I'm having wait staff so nobody has to clean up. And just thinking about what you said, Megan, I think that was her way of saying,
We're celebrating. Yeah.
yeah. And then it was Memorial Day last weekend. We talked to her about going on to hospice. And that was the hardest thing because she, after 7.5 years with her cancer, she did not want to give in. So, anyway. So that put a different light on Christmas a year ago. Thank you for that.
Linda's sister was also a very dear friend of mine and a woman, part of our women's group. She's missed dearly. She's loved dearly.
So we've known each other about 6 decades. And what is striking to me, the person you are and the work that you've done, is that you are continuously entering mystery and the unknown with courage, trust, and humility. One of the reality checks that I know that you've given yourself in the threshold and transition moments is you would ask, am I being kind enough and loving enough? That's a lesson for all of us at any moment, threshold or otherwise.
Thank you, Ray.
Joe, do we have any online questions? Okay.
Thank you. On November 11th, 11/11/2008, which 11/11, I had a serious car accident head-on. But it was like the best time of my life, in a way, with the thresholds. And I got some messages. And one was that they laugh at us when we talk about them being the dead. I think it's hysterical because really, who is the dead? We're filled with guilt, anger, prejudice, fear. They're filled with all love and joy and happiness, and so they laugh. And the other thing is that they told me that we have it all backwards. We celebrate birth and mourn death when it should be the opposite. That soul, that presence is coming down from perfection, joy, happiness, light. And in that dark womb for 9 months that you can hardly move around in, and then you got to go through that little tunnel that's, squeezed, and it's tough. It's tough. But we're celebrating that. Death, on the other side, which I believe, is that we're going back home again. We're getting out of this place, this school, and we go through a beautiful tunnel filled with colors and music and things like that. So when I tell people that, they're like, yeah, that does make a little sense there. So just take it for what it is.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here and for your presence. And thank you again, Helen.
My pleasure.
Books are over here if anybody doesn't have their copy yet, and I'm sure you'll be willing to sign them for people.
Absolutely.
So, Joe, anything else we need to do in terms of wrapping up here? Just remind people that there are refreshments and drinks and coffee, tea.
If you don't finish the snacks, I have to take them home and eat them. No, it was such a moving, wonderful presence today, I felt. Sometimes we talk about making the space we're in sacred. Well, it was certainly sacred today.
Thank you, Joe.
And so much of that is you, Helen, and your wonderful leadership, Patricia. So we're so grateful, and we have about a dozen people who've been watching us from home. So we thank you for being with us. You're a part of our community as well. I couldn't urge any of them to ask a question, but maybe next time they'll get up the courage and ask one. But we had plenty of great questions today and great examples. I just love to hear examples. And if you haven't read her book, it's full of stories, so you're going to love it.
I just want to add one thing, if I may, and that is that what we didn't get to is there is a lot of laughter in this book and a lot of stories about my own life that have nothing to do with hospice, but have everything to do with threshold moments of growth and so forth. So I hope you enjoy it and some of those stories that have come to mind throughout the.
Well, that is wonderful. And we have another guest coming up down the road from Spain.
Alice Friend.
Alice Friend. I don't know how many of you know her. Well, she's originally Canadian, but she and her husband moved to Spain. And her husband, who was in his 80s, they lost a son who was in his 30s. And so one day this son all of a sudden just started communicating with his father, Rod. And so it began to be quite an ongoing conversation. He began to write it down and began publishing a book. And it was all about his relationship with his son in spirit. And saying many of the same things you guys have been saying today, many of the same things. And then about a little less than a year ago, Rod passed, and so Alice has taken all of these communications and stories and put them in a book form. And she's going to be with us, I think, in the fall, we're planning. She's from Spain, so it will keep this conversation going, and you will look forward. Yes, Sophia.
So, people should know this. I just got
Get the mic.
Oh, okay. So I wrote this book, Consciousness Beyond Death, about all these personal stories and friends of mine. And scientists had shown interest in my first book, which was on synchronicity, but no one was interested in this one. And then, just before publication, in fact, the book Proof of Heaven? Okay, so this is Dr. Eben Alexander.
Yep.
So he read the first book, he loved it, and he found out I was writing the second one, and he said, send me the manuscript so I can endorse it. Then he writes me and says, I'm sorry, I cannot endorse your book because there's not sufficient discussion on consciousness. That was wrong. I mean, the whole foreword is written by Dr. Deborah Green on consciousness. But that was code for, I'm a scientist, I can nearly die, go to heaven, come back, and write about it. Because it's an NDE, and NDEs have been studied for decades. But I can't touch your topic, which included after-death communication. So just before publication, a new field of study has cropped up, ADC, after-death communication. So the scientists are catching up.
They're catching on. Well, thank you, Sophia. I think those of us who have an interest in things spiritual have known these things for ages, but there are scientists who, as you say, who are catching up. And I think there's more to come. And so we'll be having more of this discussion a little further down the road. But I'll tell you, today is tops. So we thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to keeping in touch. As you know, you're part of the center family. So thank you, and I'm sure Helen will be around to chit-chat, and you might like to get her book. So
Joe, I brought along another book of positive affirmations for self-love that happened to be written by my daughter here. And she's like, Mom, it's your day. I said, I'm bringing your book.
All right.
So Megan is also available to sign her book.
Hey, you gotta speak out for your daughter. This has been wonderful. Thank each of you for being here. And you have made it, and so we love you, and we're glad you're here, and we'll just continue this wonderful day far into the next week. Have a great one.
Everybody out there. Thank you.
And if you came in late, don't forget to sign in. I know a couple people didn't quite get there.
Now we can stretch, right? Thank you so much for sitting still like that.